Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, wishing you a happy Tuesday. I hope you had a great weekend. If you got a long weekend because of Memorial Day, then awesome. I hope you did something wonderful. I still hope you did something wonderful, regardless of whether you got a long weekend. I am finally starting to feel better and finally tested negative this morning, so on the road to recovery. Hubby tested negative on Sunday, so we are still laying low because we're still not feeling completely 100%, and we're trying to be as careful as possible. But we are so happy to finally be getting negative tests after it's been 2 weeks since he first tested positive. So, wow. Anyway, I hope you had a good weekend, and I hope that your week so far is going well. I am here to talk about books. Of course I am. And this week's interview is with Robert Skead about his book called Links to Liberty, Defending the Great Chain at West Point. This is the third book in his American Revolutionary War Adventures. It is a middle grade book, historical fiction about twin brothers during the American Revolution. And here is the description from the back of the book. The year 1779, the war, the American Revolution, the secret weapon, twin boys, and a great chain at West Point. In this third book in the American Revolutionary War Adventures series, John and Ambrose Clark are hot on the trail of the spy who gave away the secret of their father's mission, which ultimately led to him being shot by redcoats. But when there's an attack on America's new strategic defense on the Hudson River, the Great Chain at West Point, the twins must protect it. They soon discover things aren't always as they seem, and their friends have deadly connections. Discover how the boys' faith in Providence and each other help the cause for liberty. And again, this is by Robert Skead and Robert Skead. So it is written by a father-son duo. And this is, I think, appropriate. The timing, I'm always amazed, as I've said before, about the timing of things, because interviews get scheduled really far in advance, often because of the way my scheduling works, and so I don't even remember when exactly I started talking to the publicist about getting this interview scheduled, but the fact that yesterday was Memorial Day is appropriate for historical fiction about the Revolutionary War, but also Father's Day is not that far away, so tomorrow is already June 1st. Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but so we are kind of, in between, we are in between Memorial Day and Father's Day, and historical fiction, and now a book written together by a father and son duo, I think is really, really lovely. I had, I don't want to say difficulty, that makes it, it was poignant. I think poignant is a good word in talking with Robert over the weekend when we spoke, because he was talking about his father and writing this book, and of course that got me to thinking about my father, and then he was talking about carving with his dad, and I've talked before about how much my father loved carving, and so it was a poignant moment for me. I had some tears over the weekend just thinking about my own dad, especially with Father's Day coming up. So it has been almost 2 months, actually 2 months on the 9th will be, so still definitely in the grieving process, but hearing people talk about their relationships with their own fathers is always lovely, and I'm really glad that Robert was able to share this experience with his father. So let's go ahead and turn now to the interview with Robert. Again, the book is called Links to Liberty, Defending the Great Chain at West Point, and it is the third in the American Revolutionary War adventures. Hi, Robert. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I am happy to have you here. We are going to talk about the newest book in your American Revolutionary War Adventures series. Before we get to the books, though, and the series, if you would start by sharing a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. My name is Robert Skead. I'm 57 years old. I love to talk about ideas and stories. I'm an avid fly fisherman. Recently, I've gotten into wood carving as a hobby. And I love spending time with my family. I love reading great literature, watching fun movies, and enjoying time with my family most of all.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask a slightly random question from what you just said. What kind of wood carving do you do?
Oh, so let's see. How do I describe wood carving? I mean, I've carved ducks, not decoys, but ducks. I've carved an angel. I'm working on a turtle right now. I carved a rabbit for my wife for Easter. So just basically taking a hunk of wood and carving it into something that looks beautiful.
Wonderful. My dad was an avid carver, so that's the reason I ask. Just being nosy.
Yep. Yeah, I do with my dad, who has, we'll talk about soon, is also my writing partner.
Yeah.
So it's a great father-son activity for us to do together.
Oh, I love it. Great. Well, speaking of your dad, he co-authored the books with you. Let's start with this is the third book in the series, so let's start with the series as a whole. Can you give an overview of the series?
Yeah, sure. So it's called the American Revolutionary War Adventure Series. And what my father and I have done is taking little-known aspects about the American Revolution and put them into stories with an adventure around them for boys, girls, grown-ups, patriots of all ages. And the first book launched in 2015. Its title is Patriots, Redcoats, and Spies. And so the hook there is the readers can learn about the Culper spiring, the fact that George Washington actually had a spiring that he helped initiate during the American Revolution, aspects about spying during the American Revolution. So I was a sixth grader in 1976 when America celebrated its bicentennial, and everything back then was all about the American Revolution. And I was kind of a little buff even in sixth grade. It's typically, even now, fifth and sixth is when children learn about the American Revolution, and never heard about the Culper spiring, never knew that George Washington created a spiring or initiated it. And had I known that back then, I think I would have been even more enthralled with that time period. So the first book in the series, Patriots and Redcoats and Spies, deals with that aspect as a hook. And then obviously when you're creating a series, you're going to say, what's the next story about, right? What can we write about next? And during our research, we found out that the first submarine invented for warfare happened during the American Revolution. Now, who would have thought that a submarine could be invented during colonial times, right? But it did happen. It was called the American Turtle Submarine. They called it the Turtle because it looked like a turtle when it kind of sat in the water. It almost looked like two giant clamshells stuck together. It was invented by a gentleman in Connecticut named David Bushnell. He originally invented waterproof gunpowder, needed a way to deliver it, so he created a submarine. It actually worked. It could go underwater for 15 or 20 minutes. It had two missions that unfortunately failed. But as you might imagine, its mission would be to go underwater, attach a bomb to a British frigate, pull away, and then the bomb detonates and the ship would sink. Unfortunately, the missions did fail. George Washington helped finance the creation of the American Turtle submarine. Again, little known aspect about the American Revolution. Most listeners here today may not even have known about it. We discovered it, and I immediately said, that's the hook for book 2, which is called Submarines, Secrets, and a Daring Rescue. And then the third story in the series is called Links to Liberty, Defending the Great Chain at West Point. And the kind of creative hook for that is the fact that the colonials or the Continentals created a giant chain that draped across the Hudson River, right where West Point is located. And it's I guess you could say its point, or its reason for being, was if this chain was draped across the river, a British ship could not get upriver. If it did, it would the chain would break its hull and it would sink. So it was a deterrent to keeping the British from going up the Hudson River. So these little known aspects about the American Revolution made great hooks to build adventure stories around, to hopefully teach kids about the American Revolution and get them involved in our history. And we also made a very intentional point to celebrate the leadership of General George Washington and the creativity of patriots during that time frame.
All right, it is time to take our first break of the podcast, now that you know a little bit more about this series as a whole. When we come back, we'll be talking more about the inspiration for the series and for this third book in the series, Links to Liberty. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with author Robert Skead about his book, Links to Liberty. It is middle grade historical fiction. Let's go ahead and return now to that interview. I love that each book has the little known fact that people may not have heard of before, and it's a great way to get people, especially younger people, interested in history. Was that your initial inspiration for the series, or was there a specific moment that kicked off your inspiration for the series?
Yeah, excuse me. So the inspiration for the series began many years ago when my wife and my kids visited a local historical home here in Oakland, New Jersey. It's called the Van Allen House, and George Washington made it his headquarters for 2 days in July of 1777. And so we visited this house, had the tour, and my imagination there, just being, I guess maybe it's the writer in me, my imagination went crazy in this house, because I was just thinking, wow, George Washington walked through this door jamb that I'm walking through right now. He ate his meals here. He sat by the fire here. Apparently, the reason that he was there for 2 days was there was a huge thunderstorm and a downpour of rain. And so he and the troops, stopped on their way to West Point at this place in Oakland, New Jersey. And so my imagination just went crazy there. I got an idea for a story. And at that point in time, I never wrote it. Interestingly enough, when I went outside to the blue marker, the historical marker that sits outside of the front of the house, and read about a little bit of the history of the house, the date that George Washington was there was the exact same day that I was there as well. So I thought that was a little bit of maybe a divine inspiration, or providence, as George Washington would say, but didn't really realize how true that would be until years later, when I had this conversation with my dad. And I'm talking, maybe 10 or 12 years later. My dad had done our genealogy and discovered that we had a relative that fought in the American Revolution. And he served for the Connecticut militia and the Continental Army. His name was Lamberton Clark. My dad was pretty excited because it was in the lineage of his favorite grandfather, his grandpa Clark. And so he became a son of the American Revolution. He joined the organization. He got his certificate. He was showing me one day. At that time in my life, my wife and I lived, and my kids lived right next door to my parents. So I was at his home often, and he showed me his certificate, all excited. And he said, you should become a member as well. And then I said, oh, that's really cool, Dad. I got an idea for an American Revolution story when I was at the Van Allen house. And I just kind of told him the 30-second kind of elevator pitch idea of what I received that day in the house, in my imagination. And he's like, oh, that's cool. How come you never wrote it? And I said, well, I guess I never made time. And I thought that would be the end of the story. But little did I know, my dad took that idea and on his own ran with it. A few days later, I get an email and my dad says, check this out. I open up the attached Word document and my dad had created a treatment with a story based on the one that I had kind of shared with him, the 30-second elevator pitch. He mapped it out from beginning, middle to end, created characters, conflict. And I read this and I was like, oh my goodness, how did my dad do this? I was the writer and the family had already, been published. And, then I realized that the greatest writers are often voracious readers. And he had all these years of reading behind him. He was probably 84 at the time. He's 96 today. So I was just blown away by what he did. So for fun, I just, in book format, banged out a short scene, the opening scene of the book. And then I emailed it back to my dad. And then I called him up and I was just like any kid, wants their parents' approval on something they've created. I'm like, go check your email. Let me know what you think. And so about 15 minutes later, I get a call from him and he's like, that was fantastic. But then he said two words that really freaked me out. He said, keep going. And that's what happened. That was the spark. That was the inspiration that you asked about. My dad and I together then crafted a book together called Patriots, Redcoats, and what became Patriots, Redcoats, and Spies. And you talk about a father-son fishing trip being a great relationship builder. Writing a book with your dad is like that on steroids.
Oh, I can imagine. I love that. And I love that, your dad checked his email in his 80s. First off, that's impressive
Right?
enough. But just the fact that he took it and ran with it and said, yeah, we're going to do this.
Yeah, it was a great experience.
That's really cool. So the two main characters in this series are twin brothers, John and Ambrose. What about them as the protagonists do you think might resonate with readers?
So it's interesting, the main characters in any story are what drives the story, that and conflict. And I had grown up with twins next door to me. They weren't identical twins, and they were girls. So I knew a little bit that twins, even though they're identical, their personalities are oftentimes very different. And so we really had to use our imaginations to become twins, right? So I think that aspect of the story appeals to readers, that there's not just one main character, just ideally two main characters. Although obviously it has to be told from the point of view of one person. So in this case, it's John Clark, the more responsible of the twins. He doesn't really know how he feels about the American Revolution, right? He doesn't really believe in the cause, so to speak, yet until he gets more actively involved in it. And whereas his brother Ambrose is all gung-ho, he's the adventurous one in the family. And their dad is a courier spy for the Culper spy ring. They have no clue about that until they're basically following him to find out where he's going and discover that he gets shot. And he's got a secret message to get to General Washington. And now he's got, since he's injured, he only has two hopes of getting that message to the general, and that's his twin boys. He's taught them all about how to hunt and how to use weapons and how to track and do all the things that young boys, could do back in those days. And but they have no real resources, no horses, no money. And then they've got to get that secret message to General Washington that they received from their father on the shores of Fairfield, Connecticut. All they know is that General Washington is somewhere in the northern New Jersey area. And then it's about all the things that go wrong from point A to point B. And what they don't know is that the two redcoats who shot their dad are hot on their trail.
I think the moral of the story here is don't follow your parents.
Right?
Let them do their thing.
Let them do their thing.
So,
stay out of trouble.
They have a brother, Bertie. Is Bertie named after or based on your ancestor?
So Lamberton Clark, the dad, is based on the ancestor that served in the American Revolution.
The father.
And he has a son, in addition to John and Ambrose, that we call Bertie. And he's one of the additional characters in the sequel to the Patriots, Redcoats, and Spies, which is called Submarine Secrets and a Daring Rescue. And in that story, Bertie's supposed to operate the American Turtle submarine as requested by Ben Talmadge, who was the founder of the Culper Spiring. And when Bertie gets kidnapped by the British, the twin boys have the opportunity to take his place and then go on a mission to help rescue their brother toward the end of the book.
I would imagine that writing historical fiction would afford all kinds of fun research opportunities. Did you and your father do those together? Did you do some of them separately? How did that work in the writing process?
So we did it together, and I think he carried the bigger end of the burden on that. Being retired at the time, he had more free time. And my dad always says, "Thank God for Google," because of the internet and so much information exists. That in the olden days, you'd have to go to libraries and spend hours and hours, searching for the right book, and then, reading the books to get the information. Within a few keystrokes, a lot of information is so easily available to us now. We take it for granted. We did share that role of research. There was a lot that went into it. You want to make sure that you're getting everything right for the reader, especially for me when it came to General George Washington. You need to get his character right. And obviously the dialogue isn't how they spoke exactly back then. They spoke a lot more formally than we do today. So I took some liberties there, but read a ton of letters that George Washington had written during the time frame of our story, and used actual dialogue, paraphrased a bit from his letters to create a lot of the dialogue that's used for General Washington. So I kind of feel like we nailed him in that respect, which thank God for the research in that manner.
I think writing historical fiction would be so much fun for the research opportunities available within that writing. Although I imagine it could be really fun or potentially really tedious, depending on what kind of research you were doing and what it entailed. So I don't know, just it sounds like a lot of fun to research a historical period that you are interested in. But we are going to go ahead and take our second break of the podcast. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with author Robert Skead. We are talking about Links to Liberty, the third book in his American Revolutionary War adventures. And before the break, we were talking about research and some of the historical figures that the characters in this book encounter in their adventures in the series. So let's go ahead now and return to the interview with Robert. Yeah, I always am fascinated when I read historical fiction and the characters meet real historical figures. For me, I feel like I project, and I feel like I would have a very large sense of responsibility writing historical figures and getting them right. How much did you think about it, or did you not let yourself think about it too much when you were writing?
Oh, I definitely thought about that. Wanted to make sure that we were as accurate as we could be, even for Ben Talmadge, who was a major, the gentleman that basically George Washington said, create this spiring for me. And there are letters and memoirs that he has written as well, that we're able to, kind of borrow from to create a lot of his dialogue as well, and kind of get an insight into his personality.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to character development, then obviously there's fictional characters in the book as well. So when you start writing this series or any book that you write, how much character development do you like to do beforehand? How much comes about as you write?
So for John Ambrose Clark, the two main characters, really a lot of it just kind of came naturally. I knew their age, I knew their family background, I knew their interests. I knew John was the serious one. I knew Ambrose was the funny, adventurous one. I knew that was going to kind of be the conflict too in the book, the fact that they're so different in personality wise. I knew that Ambrose was, kind of all for the cause of liberty, and John was kind of dealing with, is this something really that people should, give their lives for? That was all I kind of knew. And the rest I can say came from divine providence as my father and I crafted it together.
There are several full-page illustrations included in the book. Who is the illustrator? Are you or your father the illustrator, or somebody else do the illustrations? How did that come about?
I wish I had the gift of being an artist, but I do not. Neither does my dad. The publisher hired a gentleman for the first two books named Wilson Ong, and he did an amazing job with the cover. And I think there's 9 illustrations in the first 2 books in the series. And my father actually bought the art for the cover of Patriots, Redcoats, and Spies, and that hangs in his family room. And I purchased some of the original artwork as well from Wilson Ong. I got one piece each from the first 2 books. And the third book, Links to Liberty, the art there is done by a woman named Catherine Sandelli. And she did the cover art, and she did 3 illustrations inside the book. And the neat thing about, I have to give my kudos to my dad for a lot of reasons, right? For Links to Liberty, the kind of question throughout the whole series is, who gave away the mission that ended up in the boy's father getting shot? Everyone kind of feels like it was so secretive. How did they find out he was the British? How did the British know he was on this mission to ultimately get him shot? And my dad came up with this solution to that that's given in book 3, Links to Liberty, Defending the Great Chain at West Point, that I thought was so brilliant. I never would have thought of it in a million years. Actually cried after he told me about it. And, kind of even while I was writing that scene, I wrote that scene alone. And then, he looked at it afterwards. I was just blown away by his creativity. And then back to the illustration question, my dad requested from the publisher that one of the illustrations be about a raccoon character that happens in Links to Liberty. My dad, for some reason, wanted these boys to have a pet raccoon, which I didn't even know, they could be even a little bit domesticated, but apparently you can have a pet raccoon. And he wanted its name to be Liberty. And he wanted this character of the raccoon to play a big role in the climax of Links to Liberty, which, we made happen, and it worked. And it's fun. And again, just another part of the stories of a son being blown away by his dad's creativity on a project they're working together. So Catherine Sandelli has, I think, 2 illustrations of the raccoon character in the 3rd book, which she did a beautiful job with.
And that's actually funny, because every time I open the book, it seems that I end up on one of the pictures of the raccoon. just one. I keep opening it to that picture. So it's funny that you mentioned that. And also, my husband had a raccoon as a pet growing up.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah, so
It's cool.
I did know you could keep them as pets.
Yeah, I never do.
Yeah. How was the writing process with your father? So you are an author, you've written before, and then to bring someone else into the writing process, did he write parts of it or did he just collaborate? How did that work for you both?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. So as I mentioned earlier, my dad and my mom at the time when she was alive lived right next door to my wife and kids and I. So brainstorming with my dad was easy. I could just go next door and spend time with him, and we could talk about it. As far as the story was going, we had a treatment that he wrote actually, which kind of gave us as a guide. It was a bit more of like a fleshed out outline is what a treatment is. And then we can go and we would meet together and brainstorm about it. And then I would actually do the initial pass at writing and write scene by scene, email it to my dad. He would either, edit, polish, write additional dialogue or scenes, or then when I went to go to his house to talk about it, we would kind of just talk about it together and take notes, and I would do it. So we would collaborate that way together. And it was a very interesting process. Like I think it was the submissive son in me. There was a time where I banged out, I think in Submarine Secrets and a Daring Rescue, I banged out like 30 pages, took the book in a kind of this one direction, and he read it and he's like, I don't like it. It's not working for me. And I had to scrap the 30 pages, and he's like, let's go this way. And then when I went in the direction that he suggested we go, and it works so much better. And, I couldn't be married to those scenes of 30 pages that I created. I just, submissively as the good son, I guess you could say, and kind of realizing, his idea was better, scrapped him, did as he suggested, and it sang, and grateful it all worked. When Patriots, Redcoats, and Spies came out, my youngest son, John, who's now 19, was, much younger. And he said, Dad, all your books are great, but I think Patriots, Redcoats, and Spies is the best because you did it with Grandpa. So I think that's a neat statement from my son that kind of summed up the experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. What draws you to writing, one, historical fiction, and two, middle grade? In this case, the books are middle grade historical fiction, but what draws you to writing in those two genres?
Sure. So I would say historical fiction because, I was growing up an American Revolutionary War buff, being, like I said, a sixth grader in 1976. My dad always kind of instilled in me a love of history. Growing up, when my dad did the genealogy and we had a relative that, served in the American Revolution, that made it even more personal. So that's kind of what sparked the historical fiction love. As far as writing middle grade, most of my books have been middle grade fiction. I did write one picture book called Something to Prove about Joe DiMaggio and Satchel Paige, with beautiful illustrations by Floyd Cooper, who unfortunately passed away last year. Very, very famous illustrator. So that's for grades 2 to 5. But everything else is pretty much middle grade. I love reading middle grade books. I read grown-up books as well. I read thrillers by Brad Thor, Jack Carr, even Tom Clancy. But I always gravitate toward middle grade fiction because I just think they're so well done. There's such great storytelling out there. If you ask me right now, I probably couldn't tell you my favorite middle grade fiction story, but they are very well done and very entertaining. And so I think that's why I gravitate toward that. Plus, I love that age group of kids. They're just so clever. They're, discovering who they are, and they're just a lot of fun to be around.
All right, time for our final break of the podcast. When we come back, more with Robert. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Pets bring such joy to our lives, and the GSMC Pets Podcast is here to share in that joy. We'll tell stories of pets finding their forever homes, acting in unexpected ways, being helpful, or just being silly. Whether you love dogs, cats, llamas, reptiles, fish, or you've never met an animal you didn't like, the GSMC Pets podcast is for you. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author Robert Skead. Are you working on anything currently?
So currently I just finished a World War II, I guess you could say it's a historical fiction book as well, but it takes place in the 1940s. I have a publisher interested in it. So we'll see if that actually comes to fruition. I haven't signed a contract yet, but it's also bouncing around. If this deal doesn't come through, then I'm sure someone else will show interest in it. To me, I think it's the best thing that I've ever written. So I'm very, very excited about it. I can't really tell too much about what the story is about right here, but I'm really excited for kids and adults to have a chance to read that. I also did a World War II picture book that is yet to be sold about World War II aviation, a real life scene that happened. That's probably one of the most fascinating World War II stories I've ever heard. There's adult books about it, but no children's picture books about it. So I had to tell it in that format.
And actually, I wanted to back up just a little bit back to the series.
Sure.
In the end of Links to Liberty, you have some discussion questions, and then you also have some activities. You can decipher a code, etc. Did you write those questions? Did somebody else write the questions? How did that end?
I did write them. So in each of the three books, there's discussion guide questions at the end that I crafted with my dad. The editors at the publishing houses obviously, have their edits to them and make them even better and their ideas. So it's certainly a collaborative effort. Same with the activities. So we wanted this to be a great resource for classrooms as well. So teachers can prompt discussion. On my website, there's also now study guides for each of the three books to also help educators, whether homeschoolers or in public schools or private schools, to further educate students about this time frame and using our stories to do so.
Thank you. For you personally, have you always wanted to write for publication, or did that come about later? How did that work for you?
Oh, that came about much later. So the interesting thing, I guess, with my background is I didn't like to read when I was a child. There was a book report given to me. I would always wait till the last minute. I remember one time I even did it the morning of being due. And I remember crying with my mom and her, sitting there reading the book out loud with me because I didn't want to read it. So the fact that I became an author with that kind of background is pretty interesting, but I kind of owe that to my mom as well. So when I was in my early to mid 20s, kind of first or second job out of college, I was miserable. And I felt like if I was going to go in the direction that I was going in, I was going to have a life that was in existence and not a fulfilled life at all. And one day, like any normal 20-something-year-old boy would do, I went crying to my mommy. And my mom reminded me about the A's that I got in creative writing in second, third, and fourth grades. And she said, I think you should go back to school to learn how to write. That's your God-given talent. So at that age, I was smart enough to know that whenever my mom said something about me, she was always, always right. Our moms especially know us so well. And so I was smart enough to listen to her. And I went back and got a master's degree in communications with, I guess you could say, a major and minor in film production and screenwriting. And pretty much that's what prompted my writing journey to where it became today. So I wouldn't be talking to you today if it wasn't for my mom.
Moms are the best.
Yep.
Do you think that you write books that you wish, do you write books that you would have wanted to read as a middle grader that maybe would have inspired you to read more?
Oh, totally. Now there's a a plethora of subjects for kids to read about. Not only because so much time has gone by, but there's a lot more publishing houses, I think, now than there were back when I was a kid, and more things coming out. Barnes and Noble is full of new books, pretty much every other week, it seems. And I think I write stories that I enjoy. And hopefully there's, kids and adults out there that are just like me that will enjoy these as well.
From your experience then, do you have advice for aspiring authors?
I do. I get this question all the time. People want to write picture books, and I've only have one picture book published, or they want to write chapter books. And so my advice to potential authors are, one, if it happened to me, it can happen to you. You have to be persistent and not give up, and not take a rejection personally, because you will be rejected. I've got a pile of rejection letters, you wouldn't believe. But I will also tell writers is don't wait until you have a huge block of time to write your book, that you really have to eat the elephant one bite at a time. So when I'm working on a story, and I pretty much only write when I have a big idea that really just oozes out of me. But my goal is every day or every 2 days to complete one scene. So that means if I have to, take 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes at lunchtime, or 15 minutes in the evening, like when my kids are little and they would go down for their nap on a weekend, or they would go down to bed early at night, I would steal that time that I had to write. Little mental game I also played with myself was, instead of sitting in front of a TV watching a show that somebody else took time to write, they were diligent with their time and they wrote a teleplay, and now I'm enjoying it. I need to be sitting at my computer and writing something that hopefully somebody else will enjoy. So that's always my advice to potential writers and people who want to be published is, don't wait for that huge block of time. Just carve out and steal little blocks of time here and there. And then at the end of 12 weeks, you'll be amazed at what you've got already created.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned a couple of authors earlier, but when you take time to read for yourself, who are your go-to authors and genres?
Well, right now, I'm reading a book called Beneath the Scarlet Sky by Mark Sullivan. I actually put a post on Facebook looking for book recommendations recently, and a friend suggested this book, and I'm really enjoying it. It's a World War II story. I probably have about 2 or 3 books going on at the same time. I'm also reading a couple of books right now, biographies about Branch Rickey, who was the general manager for the Brooklyn Dodgers that assigned Jackie Robinson and helped break the color barrier. So that's kind of the adult book genres I'm reading right now. I don't have any middle grade fictions that I'm reading right now at this moment, but I'll probably pick one up before the end of the summer.
That's funny that you mentioned Mark. He was on the podcast not that long ago, not for Beneath the Scarlet Sky, but for his newer one, The Last Green Valley.
Oh, great.
Partially takes place in Bozeman, Montana. And I'm from Montana, not Bozeman, but so.
Oh, being a fly fisherman, I love Bozeman, Montana.
Yeah. So, Robert, I know you have a website. If you can tell people where to find the website, as well as any social media that you're active on.
Oh, sure. So my website is basically my name. It's robertskead.com. Last name is spelled Skead. There you can find information about all my books, the American Revolutionary War Adventure Series, some of my sports books. I've got a series of books about one of Santa's elves and sports adventures. Elves can't dunk, elves can't tackle, and elves can't kick, and some other baseball stories there as well. Also information about my school author visits is found there. And during COVID, obviously, I didn't get to speak to many schools in the past couple of years, but typically I speak between 10 and 15 schools a year. And it's one of the things I love about being an author is getting the chance to visit schools and inspire kids to find out what their talent is and develop it to have a fulfilled life. And because not all of us are going to be writers, but every child has a special talent. And so I encourage them to discover what that is and develop it and use it, to bless not only their life, but bless others as well. And then I'm on Instagram, Facebook. Instagram is at Robert Skead, and I think Facebook is at Robert J. Skead.
All right. So you are Robert J. Skead. Your father is Robert A. Skead.
Correct.
So you are not junior.
Nope, we have two different middle names, but same first name.
My dad and my brother are the same way, and people were always confused by that. They thought my brother should have been a junior, but no. Well, Robert, we have talked a lot about a lot of different things during our time together, but is there anything that we haven't covered, whether about this series or writing, that you would like to bring up now?
Yeah, no, I think we covered everything. I just want to say that, I think one of the aspects of the American Revolutionary War Adventure Series that is so special is we want to help really instill patriotism in kids again. And I think by reading this series, besides being entertained with adventures, that hopefully every child will walk away with a greater appreciation of the sacrifices that were made for our country to be born, and for them to appreciate their own freedoms as well, and the people back in the day that fought for it. So that's one of the sidebar aspects of this conversation that I really hope listeners will take away with for themselves, to really appreciate the freedoms that we enjoy, especially, today and this weekend being Memorial Day. I know this is dropping a few days afterwards for your listeners, but it's kind of top of mind right for me today.
Sure. That makes sense. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your weekend to talk to me, especially since it is Memorial Day weekend. I really appreciate your time talking about the series and writing and the process of writing with your father. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I appreciate the opportunity so much. And, I also have to say too, these books I really feel are divinely inspired. So, to God be the glory.
Thank you so much to Robert for joining me to talk about this third book, Links to Liberty, but also the whole series, the American Revolutionary War Adventures, middle grade historical fiction. If you have a middle grade reader who is interested in history, or you think they might be interested in history, then you should definitely hook them up with this series. Or maybe you like historical fiction and you are particularly fascinated with the Revolutionary War period, then this might be a series of books that you would like to check out. As I said at the beginning, it's appropriate that yesterday was Memorial Day and that we are talking about Revolutionary War historical fiction. So thank you to Robert, and thank you as always to you for joining me. If you are a fan of this podcast, I would so appreciate it if you would leave a review, written or starred. Always helps us to get the podcast out to more book lovers like yourselves. And if you are not already doing so, follow, like, subscribe so you can get all the latest episodes, and also follow on social media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I hope that you will join me for the next episode. We are switching from middle grade historical fiction to romantic comedy. You know I love a good romantic comedy. I will be speaking with author Maisie Eddings about her book, A Brush with Love, so join me for that. In the meantime, I hope your week is going well. I hope that you... if this is your Monday, then I hope that your week is off to a good start. Even if it's your regular Tuesday, I hope your week is still off to a good start. And as always, I hope that that week involves plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.